today's mindful moment. Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive with us? Today we're looking at Destiny of the Republic by Candice Millard. It's a pretty shocking look at a really fascinating part of American history.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard the real story behind the assassination of President James A. Garfield?
Well, it's one of those stories that really makes you think about presidential assassinations, you know? It's not always so simple.
Yeah.
It's not just like a political thing. It's like this whole mix of ambition and delusion. It's almost like destiny played a part.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
So this is the question for you. Could a president's life have been saved if doctors just washed their hands?
Oh, wow.
We're talking about James A. Garfield, the 20th U.S. president.
Right.
This guy went from driving canal boats to living in the White House.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But his story ends really tragically.
It does. And the circumstances surrounding his death are just full of irony. Garfield was a man of progress.
Wow.
He was fascinated by technology and science and all this new stuff, but in the end, it was the medical practices of his time that did him in.
Yeah.
And those practices, they were, well, let's just say they weren't exactly what we'd see in a sterile operating room today.
No, not at all.
Things were very different back then.
It's crazy to think about that, you know? Here's Garfield, this self-made man.
Yeah.
He's at the Centennial Exhibition in 1876.
Right.
He's looking at all the latest inventions, like completely blown away. He even saw the hand of the Statue of Liberty on display.
Wow.
Years before the actual statue made it to New York Harbor.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, what's really interesting is that two inventors at that fair, they would later play a huge role in Garfield's life.
Really?
Yeah. You had Alexander Graham Bell
Oh, right.
with his incredible telephone.
Yeah.
And Joseph Lister, he was pioneering the use of antiseptic surgery.
Uh-huh.
Now, back then, nobody knew how their inventions how they would end up being connected to the president's fate.
It's pretty eerie when you think about it like that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Charles Guiteau.
Okay.
This is the man who assassinated Garfield.
Right.
His story is like the opposite of Garfield.
Oh, how so?
They both came from humble beginnings.
Right.
But Garfield, he achieved incredible things.
Yeah.
Guiteau, he was just a failure at pretty much everything.
Wow.
Law, religion, even a weird time with the Oneida community.
Oh.
Nothing worked out for him.
That's interesting. You know, Guiteau's life, it really reflects the anxieties and the uncertainties of a nation that was still dealing with the aftermath of the Civil War.
Yeah, that makes sense.
He was kind of lost, you know?
Yeah.
Desperately searching for some purpose, some recognition.
I see.
And his mental state, well, it just became more and more unstable. Imagine a guy so convinced of his own destiny that he cuts wood and buries it in his garden.
Really? What was he doing that for?
He believed it held some mystical significance.
Wow.
Yeah, it was one of many examples of his erratic behavior.
I can imagine.
His family, his friends, they were really worried about him. His mental health, it was a big concern. And his actions leading up to the assassination,
Yeah.
they paint this really disturbing picture of a man spiraling into delusion.
It makes you wonder how mental illness was viewed back then in the 19th century.
Right.
Was Guiteau really delusional, or was he just a product of his time?
It's a good question.
You know, a guy whose eccentricities were misinterpreted as madness.
It's a question that would come up again and again during his trial.
And even afterward.
Yeah.
His legacy, it's all tied up in this.
It is.
So let's fast forward to the 1880 Republican National Convention.
Okay.
It's total political chaos.
Oh, how so?
The stalwarts, led by Roscoe Conkling,
Right?
they're in a huge battle with the half-breeds. And guess who comes out of this mess as the nominee?
I don't know. Who?
James A. Garfield.
Wow.
He was a dark horse candidate. He never really even wanted to be president.
That's amazing.
Garfield was stunned. He got the nomination on the 36th ballot. Can you imagine? No. It shows you just how divided the Republican Party was back then.
Yeah.
It's a moment of unexpected triumph.
Yeah.
But nobody knew that this victory would set off a chain of events that would end in tragedy.
Wow.
And this is where Guiteau's obsession with Garfield takes a dark turn.
Uh-oh.
He gets it in his head that he was a crucial part of Garfield's victory, that he was chosen by God to guide the president.
And what did he want in return for this supposed divine intervention?
A political appointment.
Of course.
This is where ambition and delusion come together. Guiteau starts stalking Garfield,
Real way.
showing up at the White House uninvited.
Really?
Yeah. And his behavior, it's just getting weirder and weirder. It's actually kind of shocking how easy it was to get into the White House back then. There was no Secret Service protection like we have today.
That's hard to imagine now.
Yeah, it's almost unfathomable that a president could be so vulnerable. And then, on July 2nd, 1881, Guiteau's obsession explodes into violence.
Oh, no.
He walks up to Garfield at a train station, shoots him twice in the back,
Wow.
and the whole nation is just thrown into shock and mourning.
It's a horrible tragedy.
Yeah.
So what happens next? Well, what happens next is just this really intense medical drama, this desperate fight to save Garfield's life using what they had back then in the 19th century medicine. And that's where Joseph Lister's work on antiseptic surgery, it becomes, really important.
Wait, are you saying that just washing their hands could have changed everything?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. American doctors back then, most of them anyway, they didn't really believe in Lister's ideas.
Really?
Yeah, so they probed Garfield's wound over and over again without sterilizing anything.
Oh, no.
And that probably introduced bacteria, which, in the end, it was fatal.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, here's Garfield, this huge supporter of progress.
Right.
And he ends up dying because of medical practices that seem so outdated now.
It's one of those great ironies of history.
Yeah.
And it gets even crazier when you think about Alexander Graham Bell.
What did he do?
He rushed to Washington with his new invention.
What was it?
The induction balance. It was like an early version of a metal detector. He was desperate to find the bullet that was still inside Garfield.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
The president, is clinging to life.
Yeah.
He's got this brilliant inventor.
Yeah.
He's frantically trying to find a solution.
Yeah.
The whole nation is just waiting, hoping.
It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And while all this is happening, there's also this whole political drama unfolding.
How's going on?
Well, the stalwarts, they saw this as their chance to grab some power.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Led by Roscoe Conkling. They were ambitious guys.
It's almost like something out of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
You've got science, you've got politics, human ambition, all colliding.
It's pretty wild.
Bell's trying to save Garfield. And then you've got these political opportunists. They're just circling, waiting to take advantage of the situation.
It's a real mess.
Yeah.
But, there's also Lucretia Garfield.
The First Lady. Oh, yeah, she seems like a remarkable woman.
Yeah.
So strong, so resilient.
Absolutely. Imagine seeing your husband go through all that pain, and then dealing with the political chaos on top of it.
Can't even imagine.
Millard does an incredible job portraying Lucretia in the book, using her letters, her diaries.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's this one entry she writes, "I am trying to be brave for his sake and for the children's, but my heart is breaking."
Oh, that's just so sad.
Yeah, it reminds us that behind all the politics, behind the medical drama, there's this incredibly human story.
Yeah.
About love and loss and courage.
So powerful.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Guiteau's trial is this huge media spectacle.
Oh, I bet.
He's totally delusional, convinced that he's some kind of hero.
Really?
Yeah, he believes he was acting on God's orders.
Wow.
His behavior in court is just bizarre, just adds fuel to the fire about whether he was sane or not.
Imagine that, standing trial for murder and claiming that God told you to do it. It brings up these big questions about mental illness.
And about criminal responsibility.
Yeah. I mean, was Guiteau even capable of understanding what he did?
It's a huge debate.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how things would be different today.
Yeah. Knowing what we know now about mental health, how would Guiteau's case be handled in the 21st century?
That's something to think about.
It's a question that connects this historical event to, to issues we're still dealing with today.
So what happened to Guiteau?
The jury found him guilty. He was executed in 1882.
Wow.
But Garfield's assassination, it had this ripple effect. It went way beyond the courtroom.
Yeah. What do you mean?
It sparked this huge national outcry against what they called the spoils system.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that.
It was this corrupt practice where government jobs were basically handed out as favors.
It's hard to believe that was ever a thing.
I know, right?
So you're saying that Garfield's death actually led to positive change?
In a way, yes.
Oh.
Well, people were horrified that something as important as the presidency could be affected by political games.
Yeah.
It became clear that something had to change.
And it did.
Right.
It did. The Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, it was passed in 1883.
Okay, so what did that do?
It tried to create a system where government appointments were based on merit.
Makes sense.
Less about who you knew and more about what you could do.
So it reduced the influence of patronage and cronyism.
Exactly.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Garfield, he was all about reform. He believed in education.
Right.
And in a way, he becomes a martyr for that cause.
Yeah, although in the most unexpected way.
It's so tragic.
His death, it really pushed for change.
Yeah.
It helped pave the way for a more just system, a fairer system.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest times,
Yeah.
there can be hope, a chance for reflection, a chance for positive change. And that's a message that's still relevant today.
I agree. Garfield's story, it really shows you the power of just one person.
Yeah.
Like his life, his death, even how we remember him.
Mm-hmm.
It all points to this idea that even with, all the big forces of history at play,
It's the choices we make, the things we do. That's what really shapes the world.
So what about Guiteau?
Yeah.
What can we learn from him, from his story?
Well, I think Guiteau's story is a warning.
Okay.
It shows us that ambition, when it's not kept in check.
Yeah.
And when someone loses touch with reality,
Mm-hmm.
it can lead to really terrible things.
Yeah.
But it also makes us think about how we deal with mental illness as a society.
That's a big one.
How do we balance individual freedom with keeping people safe, especially vulnerable people?
That's a really complex issue. It's something we're still figuring out.
Definitely. But I think by looking at the past,
Yeah.
by understanding the context,
Yeah.
by trying to see why people did what they did,
Uh-huh.
we can learn so much about the challenges we face today.
I think that's one of the things that makes Destiny of the Republic such a great book.
I agree.
Millard doesn't try to simplify these people.
Right.
She shows them with all their flaws, all their contradictions.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to decide what we think.
That's what makes it so interesting.
It's not just some boring history book.
Yeah, not at all.
It's full of drama,
Mm-hmm.
intrigue, emotion. You really get pulled into the story.
You do.
You're amazed by Garfield's success.
Yeah.
Horrified by Guiteau's, downward spiral.
Uh-huh.
And then you're just so moved by Lucretia Garfield's strength.
Yeah, she's amazing. And the way Millard uses primary sources, like letters and diaries.
Right.
It's like you're hearing these people speak. You're understanding what they were thinking.
You feel like you're right there.
Yeah,
It's like stepping back in time.
it is.
You can almost feel the history happening around you.
And you realize that these events, even though they happened so long ago, they still have things to teach us.
Yeah.
So think about this.
Okay.
What can we learn from Garfield? How can we use those lessons in our own lives, in our communities, even in the world as a whole?
That's a great question. If you want to explore this part of history more deeply, you should definitely check out Destiny of the Republic. It's a book that will stick with you.
Oh, yeah. Long after you finish reading it.
Okay, so we've reached the end of our deep dive into the life and death of President James A. Garfield.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey.
I hope you found it interesting and insightful.
I did.
It's important to remember that history is more than just dates and events.
Right?
It's about real people.
Yeah.
People who made choices, who took actions. And those things, they still affect us today.
Absolutely. So if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. We've got more fascinating explorations coming your way.
And share this one with a friend, anyone who loves history.
Yeah. And if you want to support the author, you can buy Destiny of the Republic.
There's a link in the show notes.
Awesome.
Okay, until next time.
Keep those minds sharp and curious.